Now, Tara is in control.
Ha.
And so take it away, Tara.
Okay, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my ideation process. And when Sandy approached me about doing this, I thought, oh yeah, I do that all the time. That's going to be so easy. And then I realized it's not easy because it's difficult to actually document myself in my process, because my process seems to be all over the place. Like, so when I'm paying attention to that in my process of this, it was not as easy and simple as I thought. So you'll have to bear with me. My video that I made is, I think, kind of all over the place, but I think that is good because it shows just how my process is not linear or chronological. It's kind of all over the place, and I kind of start with tangents. But normally my work is, or recently my work is more figurative, and I have been really interested in this idea of the domestic arts. I've learned, I wasn't taught like sewing or crocheting or quilting or anything like that when I was younger, because I rejected it. Like my grandmothers did it, my mom did it, and I just kind of took it as like a rejection of all kinds of things that I consider like feminine work. So it isn't until recently that I've really started appreciating this idea of more domestic arts and like what that means to me and what that means to feminist arts and women's concepts, social expectations, differences in expectations between the sexes and stuff like that. So I read through what Sandy gave us, and so I started with a mind map, and I'm going to start playing my video here, and I'm going to pause it as I go along because I've documented some of it, but I have not documented all of it. So I started with a mind map with a quilt in the middle, and just after watching that video that I thought was really awesome and very informative, it kind of put it in perspective, like the different things that quilting offers. And probably one of my fallbacks is that I usually jump to process right away, because I'm normally a printmaker and I love process, and I like things that are organized and create a system a lot of times. From there, I started getting into a little bit more the meat of it, and I kind of made a second mind map, and I did not document that, but here I have a still picture of it. And some of the things that kind of jumped out for me right away was my connection to my great-grandmother and her quilting. And it took me, I mean, she died when I was a teenager, so I couldn't remember a lot about her. But one of the things that I did remember is that she made these awesome quilts that were very simple, and they were from scraps that she had around the house. She was very working poor. And I remember my parents and siblings and their siblings, us all fighting to get some of these quilts that my great-grandmother had made. I was able to get my hands on one of them, and I used it until it totally fell apart. So one of the things that kind of struck me about that is that she only had the use of one arm her adult life, because she was a sufferer of polio. So I thought it was just amazing that she was able to make these quilts with the use of one arm, on top of doing everything else she had done. Like she was a homemaker, she was a great cook, you know, she did all of that to help run the house. So I kind of jumped off from her name. Her name was Polly Moore. I couldn't remember her name. I had to ask my mother. And so kind of went off from there, from memory and this idea of family and history and family history. And then, you know, just kind of free associated and started drawing some stuff. you could see over in the corner here, I started with, I don't even remember if, in my memory, this is what the quilt looked like. It was a bunch of basic squares, and I'm not even sure that my memory is correct about this blanket that I had from her because it's been gone for a while now. So, but I started there, and then I just started drawing how I normally draw in my sketchbook. I'm very figurative, like I said. I'm very stylized, or I think, Sandy, what do you call it? Expressive?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Abstractive. It's in between expressive and abstractive, what I call
Okay.
it.
Okay, so figurative abstraction. Yeah, I'm not basing my figures on reality, but you could identify them as a figure, but there is a lot of abstraction to it. And then from there, actually previous to what I was doing before I started drawing for this design here was, I've been in a lot of meetings, Zoom meetings lately, and sometimes they're pretty boring. So and I do this kind of stuff a lot in my process, and I might not have an end result for what I want to do with these things, but for this, I was just cutting up old books that had different kinds of colorings to the pages, and from there just kind of reconstructing them into patterns and different kinds of orientations. Sometimes the orientation is on an angle and stuff like that, and so I have a bunch of these that I do, and I don't normally know what I'm going to do with them, but as I was drawing for this, I thought this is a great idea because to me it kind of represents history, pages of a book. So from there, I wanted to do some collage. So I went ahead and started cutting out things. You could see here, I recreated this little image here from this, but I went into Illustrator and made that because I didn't have the patience to make it as small as I wanted to. So I went ahead and I started collaging a little bit in there, just kind of jumping around and figuring out what I wanted to do, gluing them in there. And then I'm going to show you this, and I've worked on this one a little bit more since I did the video. And you could see I really start playing with value a lot in my work, contour and value. And starting by using some tape and stuff in there. And a lot of times in my process, like, it's leading to another thing because I'm a printmaker. I don't normally completely finish my drawings when I do them because I know that I'm going to be using some process, whether it's an etching or a screen print or a relief print, where I have tools at my disposal within those processes to finish my work. So in our new day and age, I'm really rethinking of how I want to have sort of finished pieces. And I think I am going to do kind of a combination of drawing and collage with some light printmaking, most likely like some block printing that I will do, kind of incorporate all of those things. So this is the other drawing that I was working on, and you could see I've got that pattern that I got from my memory, and so kind of jumping around to this one. And this one I went a little bit further because, right now with everything going on, my mind is very much on the virus that is going around and having this weird, stuff with the quilting with my great grandmother. And so in this one, I've kind of worked through this idea of like, I usually have like houses a lot in my figurative work, and the houses are burning. In this one, I kind of have that up at the top here also. But then I introduced a lot of negative space behind the figure here. And I started unconsciously doing this, but making the coronavirus in the background here. So a lot of times, like, I have a lot of false starts, and like, a lot of times, probably 7 out of 10 of the drawings that I do don't end up being anything, or I come back to it later and, I see something that I like and I'll work off of that. But for this one, it was really about kind of having this surreal cross-pollination between living my life now in history and thinking about my great-grandmother's history and where she came from. And yeah, I think that is the end of my little video there.
Tara, that is really cool.
Thanks. And I want to, emphasize that this is my process. Everybody's process is very different. I mean, I talk about this all the time in my own classes, is like, you have to find out like what works for you. And this is kind of how I approach it, but it's not how everybody does it, but I find it satisfying. Should I stop sharing now, Sandy?
No, don't stop. I want to ask
Okay.
a couple questions and then find out if anybody else has any questions to ask.
Okay.
So, well, first of all, before I ask the question, just thank you very, very much for doing this. And it's really helpful to see how you invested so much of your process before working on the image before this one. And then how you kind of like jumped over to this one. And it seems like it really flowed for you because you had done that other thinking.
Right.
But I just want to know if you were consciously referencing polio as a disease and corona.
Not until later. Like a lot of the things that I do, I think are intuitive until I put meaning to them. And again, this is the ideation process, right? It's just kind of like seeing what surfaces for you and seeing what works and what stands out and what you kind of latch onto. And so, yeah, the polio and then the corona or the COVID right now was kind of a cool coincidence, or I put it together eventually, but not until later.
I think not. I mean, I think that the whole ideation process is really creating a perfect sort of I don't know, kind of, it really makes the soil rich for that kind of serendipitous connections.
Right.
So thank you for doing this.
Sure.
Does anybody have any questions for Tara?
Sorry.
No worries. It's quick. I'm just impressed how you pulled so many different like styles and different kinds of medium, like the quilt into this and feel cohesive.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, it's encouraging hearing you say, 7 out of 10 times you're not, it's still something to work through, but also that you take pieces that you like and then move forward with them. Like if I'm working on something and I'm like, I'm just going to scratch this whole thing, but it's like, no, there's parts in there that you can work with. So that's a good thing to.
Yeah, I think that's really an important part of my process, because I very rarely like a finished thing that I'm sketching, but I'll be like, oh, I really like this head and this, and of course I've got like 18 sketchbooks, so I'm constantly flipping through them to see what I like. And I use tracing paper a lot to kind of take things from one sketchbook and pull them over into another sketchbook and see how they start talking to each other or not.
Yeah, thank you for your comments too. Thank you, Tara. Thank you all for your comments, because part of the reasons we're making these videos and doing this term is to create sort of open resources for other classes and other students to be able to use. And your comments really narrowed down on exactly the reasons for this. So thank you.
A little unclear on it. So we need to have 10 sketches and develop a theme. I guess I'm curious, how are we bringing the quilt into this? And is the theme just totally wide open?
The way we're bringing quilting into it is that's where you start. You may end up doing something that you may start with quilts and get to something that's like buffalo houses, which I don't even know what that is. But it's just the quilting is a place to start. So similar how Tara kind of went down her own rabbit hole, right? Saying, well, she thought about quilts and she thought about her grandmother. Then she starts thinking about that crossover between history and now, and like ultimately ended up also having this thing, like this connection between COVID and polio. And and she used the quilt motif because that's her kind of her process and her style, and a figurative. I would say that, Tara, you're pretty, because of so many long years of practice, it doesn't take you maybe as long as it might take some folks to get from one thing to something else and settle on it.
I think I mean, that's where experience comes in. Like, I've been doing this for a long time, so I have a personal vocabulary, visual vocabulary I can pull from in my head, you know, as well as physically in my sketchbooks.
Yeah. And also, so for instance, you might think about, I might think about quilting and think, okay, when I think about quilts, I think about stitching, and I think about like quilting bees, right? Which are not something we do a lot anymore. And that it tends to be like women sitting around and stitching together. And then I think about time, right? And like the kind of time that takes. So then maybe all of a sudden I start thinking about, wow, how interesting. Maybe I could use the idea of time and marks as marking time. And then maybe I think, oh, maybe I could do an interesting system drawing about how I'm spending time during this time of isolation, right? And make myself a, like sort of a what do you call it? Like sort of a key, sort of a map key like Lee Walton does with his baseball drawings, right? Do something like that. And I mean, I just made that up right now as we're talking, right? It's just like, so it could end up being something that doesn't look anything like quilts, but you got there from quilts. Does that help, Chicken Nugget, sir?
Yeah, that does help. I appreciate it.